Hey, everybody. This is Gary Matheny. Welcome to my YouTube program, Liberty Observatory. You're welcome to like and subscribe as you like. This particular program deals with the aspect of civilization, empire, dynasty. I probably may use these words interchangeably, right or wrong. But what I want to do is kind of give a thumbnail sketch of how we go through different phases that a dynasty or an empire or civilization goes through different phases. Furthermore, I'm a Western man, I'm an American, and I speak mostly with a Western mind. And so it's not my intention to discriminate against Eastern man, the Asian, the Russian, the Mongolian, Japanese. It's just that I'm not nearly as familiar. But I think that most of what I have to say about Western society is probably also true about Eastern society, because it all appeals to a certain common flaw in the character of mankind, and that is the lust for power. For whatever reason, we get some type of satisfaction over ruling over other people. I don't know. It may just be part of our Adamic nature, our fallen nature. We are sinful human beings, and an expression of that sinfulness is a lust for power, to control and manipulate and dominate other people. So today's title on episode 20 of Liberty Observatory is called The Rapid or Slow Descent into Obscurity. The rapid or slow descent into obscurity. And I look at it like the falling tree example. At the beginning, when a fall of a tree occurs, it goes very slowly, the first few degrees of the fall. And then as the fall continues and it falls harder and faster, it starts off as a relatively slow process, but it ends with a bang when that tree falls in the forest and lands. And that all relates to synergism. Certain things start small, but once they synergize, they grow exponentially, and they can grow. Therefore, they can grow rapidly at a certain point. The question is, where do they synergize at? Where do they go from just a small, slow fall to a rapid collapse? Well, either way, today's episode is going to not so much try and determine where that decisive point is, where society or dynasty or empire synergizes, but we're going to look at certain phases. So let me break up these phases. The first phase is exhilaration and excitement. When a new dynasty, a new empire, a new civilization starts to emerge, there is exhilaration, there is excitement. All things are possible. You have something new that has visited mankind, and it represents something that is full of promise. So the first phase is exhilaration and excitement. The second phase is promising, optimism. there is this can-do spirit. In America, in the early 19th century, there was a concept of manifest destiny. In other words, America was supposed to rule a large part of North America. It was manifestly destined for that to occur. And think about the Louisiana Purchase in the early 1800s. The USA bought a large piece of property from Napoleon of France. He needed to finance his wars. And basically, it opened up the West. And at that point, the United States was claiming a legitimate interest in the furthest reaches of the West. But that was done out of a sense of optimism, can-do spirit. After all, we're Americans, and there is manifest destiny that we are to rule. So the third phase would be patriotism. Patriotism is a little bit more subtle. You drop some of the hyperbolic language like manifest destiny. It's more subtle, it's quieter, but you believe in the promises of the dynasty, of the empire. You are still on board. You are there. If there's conflict, you're with your team. Now, the next phase is respect. You may not be particularly patriotic, and you may or may not believe in the institutions of your country, but you still respect, even if it's a historical sense, the institutions of your country. Like we have heard this for a generation now. You'll hear somebody say about President X, I don't respect him, but I respect the office. And so we're saying that we don't like who is holding the office, but we respect the office. And so during that phase, you may not be fervently patriotic about your country, but you respect it and you're still on board. The next phase is distrust. And distrust, in my opinion, is not a bad place. If you look at the founding fathers and the Declaration of Independence in 1776, distrust came in the minds and hearts of the colonists that they could not trust King George and England or Great Britain. And that was multitudinous reasons. It had to do with taxation, largely taxation, but it had with a lot of things, like how the British recruited sailors into their Royal Navy, and just a lot of things that were brutish and too domineering in the mind of most colonists. So distrust means that you can still respect, but you don't trust. You don't feel like you're part of the system. And that should set forth all kinds of warning bells in the system. Whatever this empire, dynasty, or civilization we're addressing, if the people come to distrust you and your leadership, it's not a good place to be, because you want people at least in the respect range and preferably in the patriotic range. The next phase after distrust is fear. Your sense of distrust has grown so great that you're actually fearful, that you are so concerned with the powers that be in that civilization, in that empire, in that dynasty, that you abhor it, you don't trust it, and you don't want it to touch your lives in any significant way. And you can see when fear comes in, a sense of alienation comes in. You no longer have warm, patriotic feelings towards whatever dynasty or empire we're talking about. And then after fear, when fear goes to its furthest extent, we have despair. Despair, what can we do? This is terrible. And a lot of people use Nazi Germany as an example of the despair involved in the German people when they no longer believed that they were going to be this huge 1,000-year Reich or dynasty. And you can see it in other instances as well. When people have despair because they no longer trust to the extent that they no longer believe in those people that comprise the empire or dynasty. And what despair does, it sets forth the groundwork for revolution or chaos. Because when you have a sense of despair, you can say, we got to do something. Something has to be done. And that's a really significant crossroads, because if you address that constructively, maybe you can improve the situation constructively. If you do not address despair constructively, you will end up in chaos, which will introduce more and more negativity and more difficulty in society, in that empire or dynasty. And then finally, the final phase is extinction. It no longer exists. In other words, it's over. And if you study history at all, most dynasties, most empires, they may not have a distinct starting and ending date, but they have an approximate period of time that it runs, where it is a significant player in world affairs. So I'm going to give you some examples of some dynasties or empires that have existed in human history. And again, forgive me, I've left Eastern civilization out of it, China, India, and, they have had tremendous histories, but I haven't really studied it or thought much about it. Again, this is the voice of a Western man. Okay, I'll give you some examples of what I consider dynasties or empires. The Greeks. That's pretty well would have universal agreement. The Romans, nobody can disagree with that. The Carthaginians. We'll address the Carthaginians in a few minutes. But I went years and years and years, I was probably close to 6 years old, before I actually did some study on the Carthaginians. I knew they were out there. I knew that somewhere along the line they fit in, but I didn't know anything about them. How about the Byzantine Empire? That's where Constantinople and the Eastern Church reigned. They reigned both to the west into Europe, and they reigned to the east into Asia, particular Asia Minor. Persia. Persia came out of Central Asia. Remember, there was a famous battle between the Greeks and the Persians. And you'll find the Persians in the Bible, in the Old Testament. How about Egypt? Yeah, Egypt qualifies. They were a long-lasting dynasty that has a tremendous amount of history about it, as well as architecture that has endured even to today. The Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire may be the longest empire that has existed since antiquity. You're talking about something that lasted, I don't know, probably close to 500 years. The Ottoman Empire did not fall apart until World War I. And the reason it fell apart at that time, they were already weakened and they didn't keep up with the advances in the West because they didn't really participate in the Industrial Revolution. But they chose the wrong side in the First World War. And so they lost a lot in World War I. The British Empire. Now, can't exclude the British Empire. It lasted several centuries. And I think in the early to mid part of the 20th century, we started seeing the British Empire eclipsed by who? The American Empire. Americans' presence on the world stage started significantly during World War II by being a key player, and then staying on the court and playing in world politics after the World War. In other words, it did not adopt isolationism. It became a player. And we're still in the American Empire, American dynasty, at least from my view. Now, I don't want to leave everybody out. I don't want to leave North American antiquity out. Close to where I was raised in St. Louis to the east side on Cahokia, in Cahokia, Illinois, they've got a huge memorial and a mound built to the Mounds people, which were ancient Native Americans who built mounds through the Midwest and lived and survived for many, many, many years. They eventually were eclipsed by the other Native American tribes, but they were pretty much a stable people that embraced agricultural lifestyles and built permanence as far as their living arrangements were concerned. The next one, it's a further bow to Native Americans. The Pueblos, those houses that were built along the sides of cliffs, the Pueblos existed a long time living in arrangements like that. The Aztecs, the Incas, Central and South America, huge empires that lasted for hundreds of years. And they weren't really displaced until the Spanish invaded South and Central America and eliminated them, and not all of it was intentional. Apparently, Western man, the man of Western Europe, carries a lot of diseases. Some of them are sexually transmitted diseases, which kills a lot of people that are not immune to it. We have immunity. We all have immunity to this, that, or the other, and some cultures will be immune to disease X, and other cultures will be immune to disease Y, because over time you built up an immunity. But with the Spanish, they apparently conveyed or transferred a lot of diseases to the Central and South African tribes, Central and South American tribes, and so that played a large part in their eventual extinction. I know that a lot of tribes are still there, but they're not fitting into the category of a dynasty or an empire any longer. So what have I left out? Of course, I've left out the Eastern dynasties or empires. I gave you about 12 or 13 of them. So there's a significant number there, and there are many more. This is just an illustrated list. But I didn't include the Japanese. I didn't include the Mongols. I didn't include the Huns. I haven't included the Chinese. I haven't included the Russians, who had the longest surviving legacy of Rome, the Tsars, Czars, the Tsars. That was Russian for Caesars. And so they had a tremendous legacy in Russia up until the Russian Revolution in 1970, when eventually the communists took control of the country. So what is not an empire or dynasty? One would be it was too short-lived. In other words, it didn't quite get there as far as length of time to be an empire or dynasty. One example of that would be the Nazis in Germany. Another example of that would be the Napoleonic era in France. It seemed like France's domination of Europe didn't really survive Napoleon. And then we also have, like, I call it the Constantine empire or dynasty, but it got swallowed up by the Byzantine Empire. Constantine is the one that united the West and the East and founded the city of Constantinople, which we now know as Istanbul. And so Constantine was the one that connected the West and the East in a significant and long-term way as it relates specifically to the Byzantine Empire, which connected the West and the East. And I'm not talking about the Far East, like China and other Far East countries. I'm talking more in regard to Western Asia, Asia Minor, and also I can't speak any further without mentioning Alexander the Great, which was about 300 BC, and he also he basically was able to conquer large parts of Eastern Europe and Western Central Asia, or I should say Asia Minor, and basically he's from Macedonia, so I consider Macedonia kind of like a cousin to Greeks, province of Greece, and so there he's kind of hung on to the Greek dynasty. So let's take a few illustrations, only two. Will do the United States of America. Where is the United States of America on this spectrum of or phases of an empire or dynasty? Well, basically, let's think in terms of 1776. 1776 was the Declaration of Independence. To me, and this is subject to a lot of disagreement, it is a more important document than the U.S. Constitution. That's a personal preference because the Declaration of Independence hits me at a very, very deep level. It exemplifies my love for freedom and liberty. And so in 1776, that's the date of the Declaration of Independence. That is the explosion that results in the Constitution a dozen or so years later and gives birth to all this enthusiasm and optimism in the United States of America. Well, I remember 1976, and that was the 200th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, July 4th. And I remember where I was at. A lot of people in my age know where they were when Kennedy was shot. A lot of younger people know where they were when there was 9/11. I remember where I was at when they delivered the verdict on the O.J. Simpson trial in the 90s. There's certain things that stick with you. But in 1976, I was at a resort on Lake Carlisle. It was an RV resort. And that's where we spent July 4th, 1976. And at that time, there was a huge gathering. About 1 million people gathered on the riverfront in St. Louis. The arch was still relatively new. They had a riverfront that was congenial to large masses of people, fireworks display. In that time period, there was a huge amount of patriotism. Patriotism was very strong in 1976. And then let's go to 9/11. Some 25 or so years later. 9/11, the aftermath of 9/11 was a huge spike in patriotism. Remember how patriotic we were shortly after 9/11? And it was kind of like a huge spike, but then kind of we went back to where we were at. Wherever we were, we went back to that, because I don't really see that 9/11 did much to influence the long-term outlook of the typical American towards their country. May have been, in some respects, negative in the long term, but who knows? I'd have to think about that further. But how about January 6th? January 6th, 2021, there was an alleged insurrection. That alleged insurrection was put down by the Washington Capitol Police and I guess others. Why wasn't there a huge surge of patriotism? Here was this group of people that were trying to take over our government, and our government, through its law enforcement personnel, defeated the insurrection. But there's been no surge, no spike in patriotism about our country. In fact, there's been more speculation. The report that was issued by Congress, the documents that supported the report, have been destroyed. There's a lot of things associated with that day that people question. And what should be on the surface, a spike in patriotism, we put down the insurrectionists, has actually backfired among the general population, because there's less patriotism and there's less respect and there's more distrust. Remember, I said earlier that I think mistrust or distrust is a pretty good place to be. We should not be trusting our authority, those that rule us. We can respect them, but don't trust them, because they have no inside track on your life. Guess who has the inside track on your life? You do. Don't trust authority. But 1976, 200th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, a huge amount of patriotism. We loved our country. We loved our leaders, no matter what political stripe they were. 2026, if I've done my math right, is the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, and there's no hype leading up to it. I don't even know whether we'll celebrate it. Oh yeah, yawn. Yeah, that meant something at some point in the past, but we now have a DEI agenda, and patriotism actually divides us, and so anything divides us, we must marginalize and forget about. So it'll be interesting in 2026 to see whether we have a surge in patriotism. I don't anticipate it, but it may be a temporary blip, but probably not a spike. Not enough people believe in what America's all about any longer. Sad commentary, but that's the way I see it. So let's take a look now at the Carthaginians. The Carthaginians had a dynasty that lasted about 750 years. So let's just say, Declaration of Independence, 250 years. Let's throw in another 100 years for the era of the colony. So we'll say 350. So when you say 350 for the American empire or dynasty, that's not even halfway with the Carthaginians. And the Carthaginians have been eclipsed by Rome and Greece and some of these other dynasties that have come and gone over time. So the Carthaginians were traced back to the Phoenician tribes. They were traders. And they went from the Levant, which is the older name used for that area where Israel and Jordan and Syria currently are at, and I guess Lebanon as well. And basically, they went to North Africa. And North Africa became very, very civilized, the Carthaginian Empire. They were merchants. They were traders. And basically they set up cities or made arrangement with cities already in existence in Spain, Cyprus, any place they could in the Mediterranean, because the Mediterranean Sea was the heart of commerce during that period. So they were merchants. They had no real military class, which hurt them. So they wound up hiring mercenaries. And one of the problems with antiquity is that mercenaries sometimes would change sides, that hold out for the people that paid them the most, or the winners. They wanted to be on the side of the winner. So not having a military class in an empire or dynasty really hurts you in the long haul. You need to have a military class, which America has tried to enhance through its military establishments. Nothing wrong with that in my mind, as long as it doesn't turn against the people that they're trying or ordered to protect. They had a huge conflict with Romans. In fact, if you go back to 200 BC, there's a famous Carthaginian general named Hannibal. And Hannibal, he took elephants from North Africa, went to Spain because the Carthage Empire was very strong in Spain. He marched the African elephants through the Alps, which is a southern European mountain range, into Italy, and won battles in Italy. They were beating the Romans. But I think he made a key mistake, and he got overextended from his supply lines. And what the Romans did was, instead of trying to attack Hannibal directly in a heads-on battle, which when they did, they tended to lose, they cut off his supply lines. So the Carthaginian invasion of Rome, of Italy, it petered out because their supply lines were cut, and Hannibal wound up catching a ship back to North Africa, and some would say to his disgrace. A great general for Carthage wound up anonymous and virtually forgotten. So what are these common qualities for the decline of empire or dynasty? Well, earlier I said lust for power. They all have lust for power. Some of them try and have altruistic reasons for it, like it's better, like United States of America, Manifest Destiny. It's better for the Indians to live under the authority of the great white miracle man in Washington, D.C., than it is to live on their own in the plains and not answer to the great white general or overseer in Washington, D.C. And so there is an element of arrogance associated with lust for power, but it's still a lust for power, even if you can characterize it in altruistic means. Now, here's perhaps the most controversial aspect of today's episode. Destruction of these empires and dynasties is inevitable. I'm an optimistic person. I love God. I love the scripture. One of the psalmists said, I would have despaired unless I had believed in the goodness of God in the land of the living. So I believe in the goodness of God in the land of the living. But if you study history, these dynasties die off inevitably. Think about when you were a younger person. Didn't like everybody else die when you were younger? You had a sense of immortality. You thought dying happened to somebody else. But as you got older, you had to come more to terms with your own death, your own mortality. And so as a young person, you may say, well, that happens to somebody else. I'm not going to die. But in the back of your mind, you know, yeah, I will sometimes die because nobody lives forever. Well, that's part of the inevitable extinction of dynasties and empires. Change happens. And the further you go into the tree falling to the ground, the faster the change occurs. So you can go on one particular, slowly at the top of the tree starting to fall, and change is slow, slow, slow. But then once it synergizes, it goes faster and faster and faster until it hits the ground. Now, here's part of the hitch with this. If civilizations destruction is inevitable, part of the problem is there's no guarantee that the replacement will be any better. That's why when you hit that fork in the road where you want to be constructive and build something new versus chaos. And so those people who are alive during that time play a large part of reconstructing a new society. Think about the founding fathers in 1776 and in the 1780s passing the Constitution. They took a constructive means to rebuild society, frankly, in their own image. Not in the European image, but in the American image. But there's no guarantee that's going to happen. The new might be worse than the current. It's possible. Look at places like Venezuela in the modern era. I don't know. I don't even know whether it's bottomed out yet. It just seems to get worse and worse. There was a song by The Who back around 1970. And it basically, you know, here comes the new man, just like the old man. So, you know, it's kind of like something new does not necessarily spell better. And so people that have a constructive mind need to stay engaged, because don't necessarily think that the death of one leads to something better. It could actually possibly be worse. So where is the best place for us citizens? You know, you go on that spectrum. I think that we should be optimistic. You know, not necessarily over the top optimistic, manifest destiny, and we're better than everybody else, and we know more than everybody else, and we're the smartest people, yada, yada, yada. But be optimistic. Be optimistic about your future. Be optimistic about your country. Be patriotic. Support your country in a generalized way. Support the identity that your country has developed over time. You know, we used to have the American dream, where basically it said, if you work hard enough, you can find success in America. I say you can find your place under God's Son. Find your place. You can find your place still in America. Maybe a little harder now because of all the controls and all the constraints, but you can still find your place. You can accomplish the American dream. So we should respect, but does not necessarily follow that we should trust. So I think at the end of the day, where America is at now, that we are somewhere between respect and distrust. Most of us still want to respect our government, but we don't trust it. And that's not a wholly bad place to be, because as a general proposition, we should distrust authority, but respect it as well. Thank you for joining me today. Stay tuned for another edition of the Liberty Observatory. Thank you.